Hi, I'm Patrick Markfort from Articulate Nerd.
And I'm Dave Ferraro from Comics and More. And this week we are going to be reviewing the recently released Gunnerkrigg Court, Volume 3, Reason, from Thomas Siddell. And this is a book that actually started as a webcomic. And you can still read it as a webcomic on Gunnerkriggcourt.com, where you can find some fun merchandise that we actually just saw this afternoon that I will probably be buying some of. But Archaea actually picked up Gunnerkrigg Court to publish the hardcover bound volumes of it, so it can be released in bookstores and stuff. And that's how I first encountered it. I've really liked Archaea's offerings, especially starting with like Artesia. So I've been kind of following a lot of their books that they've released. Gunnerkrigg Court is one of my favorite fantasies in comics, like period. I think it's an amazing series. It's starting with the first one, we get introduced to Antimony Carver. She's a girl who is an orphan who comes to this like strange kind of school for magic, and she just encounters a lot of like odd creatures. She makes friends. She's kind of like this lonely figure. She has a past that's kind of tragic, but she's kind of like looked at as maybe this like this medium who might like be able to bring some peace between some warring factions that are kind of happening between the school and the forest. Anyways, Antimony has a little stuffed wolf that has been possessed. And that's kind of like her little sidekick that's kind of goofy. He kind of lusts after her, but he has this like affection for her because she resembles her mother, who he was actually in love with before. Mm-hmm. And she also has like a lot of like school companions, most notably Kat. Who's this kind of a feisty one who kind of stands up for her. And other than that, though, Antimony's kind of like an outcast at the school. The kids are kind of afraid to talk to her, except for a handful of others. But I think this series has just a lot of like great characters. At the beginning of this series, they like introduce like you know characters here and there, and then they kind of build on it. It kind of like builds a mythology as it goes along. Yeah. It becomes much more epic. I remember especially in the first volume, there's this part where they introduced like the concept of the shadows and the robot and the Dragon Slayer guy, and there was a part where the robot was coming across the bridge, something was wrong with him, and the Dragon Slayer guy, what was his name, Mr. Eglamour, like throws a sword at him, and the shadow gets destroyed, and Antimony like falls over the bridge. It was like a huge epic scene. And I just remember being like, "Oh my god, this is so awesome!" So that's when I like really fell in love with it. I feel like when all those elements just kind of came together there and melded. And since then, it's really built on things. Like some things that are introduced in the first volume don't even really get touched on much until later on. Like there's a scene where they go into like this kind of like almost like a holodeck with this peaceful tree that they feel very tranquil with. And they see a shadowy figure, and then we actually see who that is in the third volume, which we hadn't seen before.
I like that scene.
Yeah.
When the two girls were in the
yeah, it was really nice. But there's just a lot of good stuff with like their kind of mysterious histories. There's this huge like mythology with this coyote character who seems to be manipulating things. There's mysterious characters like Ms. Jones, who you don't really know what she is or what her past is, but she's just really cool. There are a lot of characters like that are just very, very much enigmatic, and you just kind of love them. I feel like, at least. But in Volume 3, we see a lot of that, more of that mythology building, as well as you get to see them going on a camping trip that I thought was really cool with these robot cows and the laser beams, and I thought it was just kind of funny. I just chuckled a lot during that scene. I don't know. We also get to see some characters like Parley and Andrew. I really like. They're kind of just side characters, some of their classmates, who are just kind of fun. As well as Zimmy and Gamma, who are kind of weirder characters, but I think they kind of had their big like arc in Volume 2. Very dark stuff, but they go back to them a little bit. So everybody kind of gets their scene in this one, except Mort, the cute ghost from the first volume. Yeah, he's kind of like faded into the background, but hopefully we'll see some more of him. But he definitely brought a lot of humor to the book that I'd like to see again. But at least we have Rainer Dean for that. So it's kind of complicated, but I mean,
well, it's a big cast.
Yeah, and it just builds on itself. Like it's very it's a soap opera fantasy. So
right.
So what is your take? I love it. So
right. Well, yeah. So Dave's been reading this series since it's been coming out in the hardcover books for quite a few years.
It's been 3 years since the first
crazy.
one. Yeah.
I hadn't read it, but I knew he loved it. So I'm sure you're dying at this point to know what I think of it.
We don't talk about these before we talk about this.
We make a point of not discussing what we've read the week before. So Dave has always been trying to get me to read Gunnerkrigg Court for a long time, and I just haven't gotten around to it
so
yet.
I'm like, have you read any more Gunnerkrigg Court?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So so I read the whole thing that's collected in these 3 books just over this past week or so. So I read it a lot more compressed than you did.
Yeah, and you haven't really read much for webcomics, with the exception of Body World by Dash Shaw.
Yes.
Which is a very different kind of work than this.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, this is much more, I think, indicative of what's out there for a lot of webcomics.
Yeah.
Especially if you go to topwebcomics.com where they have, like, voting and stuff like that. It's a lot more fantasy titles like this.
Well, and this is, I noticed, won a lot of awards for web cartooning, which doesn't surprise me.
And this is easily one of the strongest ones that I've seen since I've paged through a lot of them.
So, I really liked it.
Good.
I really enjoyed reading Gunnerkrigg Court. I don't think I like it as much as you do. It's definitely and obviously in the same mode as a lot of young adult fantasy novels. I mean, certainly shades of Harry Potter, very much so. In this book, a lot of the young adult books by Neil Gaiman, who has a blurb on the back cover of the first volume. It's very similar to his work and reminiscent of a lot of other things. Which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's firmly in that mode. And I don't think ultimately it is as good as a lot of the other works it sort of evokes or emulates. But I do think if you like that kind of thing, and obviously there's a lot of people who do, you would be well off reading Gunnerkrigg Court. You would probably really enjoy it because it is well done. It has a really appealing art style that's somewhat reminiscent of manga without overtly trying to look like manga. I think he's a cartoonist kind of like someone like Brian Lee O'Malley, who's just kind of absorbed a lot of the styles from a lot of different kind of comics, manga included. So he just naturally kind of incorporates some of that stuff into his style. So it's a great looking book. The colors are beautiful, which I'm assuming are the same colors that show up on the website.
Yeah, it looked like it.
Yeah. So that's beautifully done.
What do you think about the early art versus the later art? Because at first it seemed a little like she had more angular faces, and it was.
Well, the art style changes a lot, as it does, for most artists working on a single series over a long period of time. The characters look a lot different in the early volumes than they do in the later volumes.
And this set looks like he started in 2006, so it's been 5 years that he's been working with these characters and really honing their look. So
right, so this is a big project for him. So the art style does evolve, and I think it improves a little bit as it goes along. Bone is another comic that I was going to compare this to.
Yeah, I think of everything you've mentioned, I think Bone is the most... I think it's the closest. It goes to some dark places, but it has that funny element. Yeah, has lots of funny little side characters.
But it's not nearly as good as Bone.
Yeah, I mean, Bone obviously is epic. Bone's a masterpiece.
And I feel like Jeff Smith has more of a command over his cartooning. But again, if the worst you can say about it is that it's not as good as Bone, it's not as good as, the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, you're still doing pretty good. You know what I mean? So I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism. I just want to make it clear, it's probably not, for me, a great, amazing work as it is for you, but I did enjoy reading it. I thought it was very well done. What else do I want to say about it? The humor felt kind of flat for me. A lot of the humor I didn't think was as funny.
Oh, okay.
If I had a criticism of it, it might be that, especially the early volumes, are it's a little bit all over the place. You know what I mean? And that may have been by design. That may have been, just him kind of finding the story.
They're almost like vignettes at first. Later on, it really just kind of.
The thing it actually reminded me of was Chester Brown's and the Happy Clown, of all things. Okay. In that way, in that it at first seems as though it's this kind of vague, kind of mellow of this school, and there's ghosts and there's robots, and then here's a little story about a robot, and here's a little story about a ghost, and here's this, and it's just all kind of all over the place. And then as it goes along, he starts bringing back all those elements and kind of weaving them into this larger backstory, and it becomes more of a traditional kind of fantasy epic as it goes along. Mm-hmm. So that might have been by design from the very beginning, or it might have been just how it ended up developing. I don't know, but and the Happy Clown is like that too. It seems like all these kind of one-offs and non sequiturs, and then he just kind of weaves it into this big, ridiculous, like, ongoing story. So it's a really weird comparison to make, but that element of it did remind me of that. So yeah, but ultimately I think it was a good book, if not a great one for me. But it doesn't surprise me that it won a lot of webcomics awards, and I bet there are a lot of people for whom this is one of their favorite comics of any type, because it hits that kind of sweet spot. If you like this kind of thing, it's probably going to do it for you. You know what I mean? It's not good enough where if you're not interested in fantasy and stuff and kind of all ages stuff, you need to read it anyway. But if you are into that, it would more than satisfy your expectations for that particular genre.